Roger Stone Show. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And we're back on the Roger Stone Show. Joining me now is Barry Habib. He is the Chief Executive Officer of MBS Highway. I call him an economic guru because he is the person more knowledgeable about the housing and mortgage markets in America. He's also a shrewd analyst of the overall economic picture in America. Barry Habib is actually widely credited with saving the mortgage industry back in 2020 from margin calls due to Federal Reserve actions. It was his presentation to several of the Federal Reserve governors that created stability at a critical time. He's also the front man in a rock band, which I'm trying to convince him to rename Barry Habib and the Hot Shots. Barry Habib, welcome to the Roger Stone Show.
How are you, Roger? It's so good to be with you again.
You and I had the privilege of speaking at a great conference in Las Vegas, the Mastermind Summit for 2025. It's always great to be with you. I am always amazed at your ability to take very complicated matters and make them understandable to the average American, which is why we're honored to have you with us today. Bill Pulte, who is the director of the Federal Housing Finance Administration, recently called on Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, to cut rates. Let's listen to Director Pulte. You have been very vocal in calling on Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell to cut interest rates with inflation at 2%. How does Powell, whom I must point out is not an economist, he's a lawyer, and I think incredibly political, how does he justify keeping interest rates at 4.5%?
Well, his time has come. He's got to go. Enough is enough. This guy has had his day. He's done too much damage. He continues to do too much damage. I mean, we all know this guy from COVID, and then Biden renominated him. I mean, this guy is just a disaster. He's a mess, and he needs to go. You know, President Trump has so much momentum right now in this country. You know, he has the economy rearing to go, but we have this guy, Jerome Powell, who is just holding it back. And frankly, Roger, I think that his hate for President Trump, unfortunately, is the reason that he's not lowering the rates. You bring up a great point. If rates are at 4.5% and inflation is at 2%, why is he punishing the average American? And it only leaves you with one thing, which is that he hates him. He hates the president, and he doesn't understand the plight of Americans who have to deal with the ramifications of his terrible, terrible policy.
That, of course, was an excerpt from the Roger Stone Show last weekend when we were honored to have Bill Pulte, the director of the Federal Home Finance Agency, as our guest. But I wanted Barry Habib to join us today because I don't want people to think this is merely ad hominem or that just a simple political disagreement. Based on history, based on the current dynamics of the economy, a rate cut in interest rates makes sense right now, does it not, Barry?
Yeah, I think so, Roger. So a couple of things. So I'd like to take this apart step by step if we can, because
Please.
I want the listeners to really get the full picture. So first of all, you were 100% correct, very astute of you. Jerome Powell is an attorney by trade, not a trained economist. And Director Pulte, which, by the way, what a terrific director Bill Pulte is. He has accomplished more in such a short period of time than I've seen any other director of the FHFA accomplish. And I will tell you, this is something that I've been involved with closely for nearly 40 years. So high praise for Director Pulte. He did say in that little excerpt, amongst other important notes, that the consumer is being punished by the Fed's missteps. And listen, Roger, the Fed is made up of 19 members. 12 of them vote on policy. So it's not Jerome Powell in a vacuum. However, he is the leader. And when, let's just say if it's a baseball team or a football team, if the team's doing poorly, it's the person on top. But if the company's doing poorly, they look at the CEO. Jerome Powell's the leader. And quite frankly, most of the people at the Fed, most of the governors, as well as most of the presidents that represent the different districts, they fall in line. And it is up to the leader to set the tone. So first off, Roger, Jerome Powell had major missteps that punished consumers back in 2021 and 2022. He was not alone. The Fed members, and of course, and Janet Yellen was beating the drum to go big. You had missteps then when we all knew inflation was on the rise. It was very evident. You can't have zero interest rates, quantitative easing, and trillions of dollars pumped into the system. I mean, someone in junior high school who understands how this works would have to tell you that inflation is coming. Because remember, you had PPP, you had the employee retention tax credits, and of course, the Biden budget buster of $1.9 trillion. You had this all pumped into the economy at zero interest rates while the Fed was purchasing an incredible amount of both treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. We all knew it was coming, but we had Jerome Powell and company looking as they have always done in the rearview mirror. And you hear him say this. He says, we want to be data dependent. There's problems with that, Roger. Data can be very backward looking. The economy moves dynamically. And part of what goes into his calculations for inflation is something that we've discussed before, is shelter. That makes up 44% of the reading that you get on core CPI and nearly 20% on core PCE. Those are the two readings that the Fed counts on. So when you're looking at something that has 40% or 20% of it a year delayed, that isn't very effective use of being a good leader. You should be looking forward. We all knew that inflation was going to be on the rise, but yet the Fed stood pat. Let me just give you some comparisons. Back then, back in 2022, so we don't have to go too far back, March of 2022, let's go back 3 years and let's compare it to today. When we go back 3 years, the Fed was still purchasing $30 billion a month of quantitative easing. They were purchasing treasuries, mortgage-backed securities, and that was a reduced clip of $30 billion a month. So that's on top of keeping interest rates at zero at the time. Today, by comparison, the Fed funds rate is 4.375, and the Fed is, although it's a minor share, doing the opposite of quantitative easing, quantitative tightening. So there's a tremendous contrast in what's going on. Now, the Fed does not want to reduce interest rates, but it's curious that back in March of 2022, when rates were at zero, so you can't go any further unless you want to go to negative interest rates, the unemployment rate was 3.6%. Today, it's 4.2% and rising. By the way, I bet you on Friday, I would not be surprised to see that tick a little bit higher, Roger. And then inflation readings. If we take a look at that core PCE that the Fed was looking at back then, it was 5.5%. Today, it is less than half of that at 2.7. Why are you not cutting rates? And the other one is, how about this? I think this might be a shocker to the listeners. Back then, inflation as measured by headline CPI was 8.5%. Today, it's at 2.4%. Yet, he was not so concerned about inflation or the labor market then. Yet today, he is afraid of his own shadow, as are potentially other Fed members. Jerome Powell needs to be a leader or go. He needs to be in a position to get the Fed in line and say, hey, we have to be forward-looking. We have to understand that there are certain things going on in the economy today that are troublesome signs. The labor market, go ahead. Sorry, Roger.
I was going to point out, Powell cut rates 50 points right before the last election, but he can't do it now with inflation lower. Now, Powell will say that's because of tariffs, but he and many of the establishment economists have been conditioned to treat tariffs as inherently harmful. The truth is, tariffs, I think, are one of the few forms of taxation that actually preserve a government's accountability to its people. Tariffs tie the state revenue to national production and trade policy. Tariffs allow citizens to remain sovereigns of the government. Incomes and even consumption taxes subjugate. This argument just doesn't hold water. I was sorry to interrupt. Please go ahead.
No, well, I'm glad you did, because you bring up an excellent point. And he has been saying that they do not want to cut rates due to the fact that tariffs could present an inflation problem. But we know this. we know that when a tariff comes, and most people don't understand this. Let's just say you put a tariff against a country like Vietnam and say, oh, Vietnam's going to pay. Well, you know what? Who pays it is the importer here in the United States. Vietnam doesn't pay it, but you can negotiate with them and have them eat some of it. But then the importer brings it here, and then it goes to a distributor, a wholesaler, a retailer, and then to the customer. None of those items are tariffed. So what might be a 10% tariff, by the time it gets to the consumer, it might be, if anything at all, because there might not be enough pricing power and consumers can make choices, it might be very little to nothing. And even if it is, two things, Roger. They don't last. It is different than persistent inflation. It is a one-time price bump. And even in the words of Jerome Powell, as of his last press conference, he said that, well, it'll bump up and then come right back down. So why are we so concerned with a transient event if he knows it's going to come right back down? It's literally a speed bump, if anything at all. And by the way, Roger, tariffs can actually be deflationary if they cause a slowdown in the economy. Yet Jerome Powell and company are not looking at any of these because he is fixated on this. And, you know, Roger, the labor market also has some concerns. Job openings are declining. The duration of people on unemployment are rising. You have job openings have dropped precipitously, and they may be overstated as well. So there's a lot that's going on here. And one more thing about inflation, Roger.
Let's do it on the other. Let's do it on the other side. We got to take a break. If you're just tuning in, we're listening to Barry Habib, the CEO of MBS Highway. We're talking about why the Federal Reserve has not cut interest rates, and we'll be right back.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
Children'sChampions.org. The Roger Stone Show. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And we're back. We're talking to Barry Habib, the Chief Executive Officer of MBS Highway. He does a terrific daily update on the market. He is, I think, the country's leading expert on the housing and mortgage market, as well as a keen economic analyst of the overall picture. And we're talking about why the Federal Reserve under Jerome Powell has not cut interest rates. Barry, the floor is yours.
All right, so real quick, we're going to go fast here. So the Fed can take three positions. They could take a position of being accommodative, which they're trying to stimulate economic activity, neutral, kind of like Goldilocks. Things are good right now, so we don't want to make a move, or restrictive, which intentionally means they want to slow economic activity, with the goal being maybe to slow inflation or the labor market. They are currently in a restrictive stance, very restrictive by about 1%. So if the Fed cut 1%, from their current level of 4.375 to 3.375, they would then be in a stance where it would be neither accommodative nor restrictive. So just everybody needs to first get that. Now, if we were to look at the Fed's favorite measure of inflation, the one that they want to target to be at 2%, for the last 13 months, the individual monthly readings, 11 of them, have come in quite favorable. And in fact, if you took those 11 months and you figure out what would the annualized level be, it'd be right at the Fed's 2%. Now, there are a couple of anomalies, January and February this year, which caused the readings to be a little bit higher. That, unfortunately, was due to some items that are not responsive to Fed policy being more restrictive. Things like healthcare, things like prescription drug costs. Yeah, the Fed can hike rates all they want. It's not going to impact these items. And the biggest one is, as we've discussed, is shelter. You take away the two anomalies there for those couple of months, we have some really good readings. In fact, the last 3 months, how about this? We're running below the Fed's target because it's at 1.6% is the annualized rate for the past 3 months. Unfortunately, these January and February numbers won't come out of the data. They're going to push this data higher on an annualized basis until next February. But if the Fed waits for that, the economy could be in a very different position. So now, Roger, when we are looking at the harm that the Fed's done. It is enormous. Everyone listening feels it every time they go to the grocery store because the Fed was highly complicit, led by Jerome Powell, in creating this inflation. And now they are highly complicit in hurting consumers. Where's the pain? Every time somebody makes a payment on their home equity line of credit, on their credit cards, on their car loan, when they go to purchase a new car and see what the payments are, car leases, which kind of ironically are one of the items causing inflation. So the car lease means that, if you have the Fed pushing rates or keeping rates higher, that's keeping car leases expensive, which adds to inflation. Just think about the moronic sense of that. Okay. Now, here's something else that's very important is that debts and deficits matter. You have this big, beautiful bill, which is now highly debated, trying to get passed, but it is a big concern about what the deficit levels are. Well, interest on the debt is enormous. I've done the math on this. I've worked with AI on this, and it appears that if Jerome Powell were to take interest rates to a not accommodative, but just a neutral stance from where they are today, which is really where they should be, then that would save us $30 billion a year. I'm sorry. $30 billion a year in interest savings on the debt. So the problem that we have is we're adding to these issues. Social Security payments are based on the rate of inflation as well. So what the Fed really needs to do is look forward instead of looking in the rearview mirror. Jerome Powell needs to lead the Fed in a way that can hopefully bring us to having him take his foot off the neck of the economy and let this economy grow, because that will reduce the deficit. And unfortunately, we have not in the past seen many other Fed members break ranks. However, there is a silver lining. Just recently, Governor Chris Waller, Governor Michelle Bowman, and Chicago Fed President Austin Goolsbee, all of these are part of the 12 voting member group, have broken ranks with Jerome Powell. They've said enough is enough. And they are now openly, which is unusual, saying that they are in favor of a rate cut next month at the end of July.
Really, really extraordinary. I love your analogy about driving the car while looking in the rearview mirror. Seems to be exactly what Jerome Powell is doing. The real irony is that he keeps insisting that it is Trump who's acting politically, yet it's very clear that he cut rates to try to benefit the re-election of Joe Biden when the indicators at the time were not as favorable for a rate cut as they are at this instant. True?
I would agree with that. Now, at the time of that cut, actually, he was asked about why he was in favor of cuts and not at this present time, even though you had inflation levels that were higher, even though you had unemployment levels that were lower. He claims that the picture was less cloudy. Well, look, I remember him saying around that time, he used the term, you could look it up, we are navigating by the stars. I mean, you're our Fed chair. You're navigating by the stars? Don't you have a freaking opinion? Don't you have a way to kind of guide us through? We're dependent on the stars? We're going to call our astrologist to see which way we should do with Fed policy? This was ridiculous. Look it up. We're being guided by the stars is what he says. So for him to say the picture was less cloudy, that they had less uncertainty, and what I'm referring to is the fact that it's very uncertain with the tariffs today, which to some extent perhaps it is. But for goodness sakes, it was no more uncertain. In fact, I think we have more certainty here. The unemployment rate is higher. Inflation is at a level where it appears to be better. Now, he said at that time it was coming down, but it was coming down from extraordinarily high levels. So we are in a position, I think, right now, Roger, where the Fed needs to get their act together. They have to stop this ridiculous boom-bust cycle by being too late. They're too late to hike, causing a bust. And what they have to stop doing is being too late in a easing mode to prevent this economy from growing.
Yeah, they're panicans, I think. All right, I want to thank our guest, Barry Habib, CEO of MBS Highway, for joining us once again. To our many friends out there, thanks for joining us today on the Roger Stone Show. God bless you and Godspeed.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. 77 WABC invites you to a family fun day and softball showdown on July 20th with net proceeds benefiting Shriners Children's. John Sterling will call the game as the FDNY takes on the NYPD with special guests Dwight Gooden, Art Shamsky, 77 WABC hosts including Sid Rosenberg, Anthony Cumia, Lionel, Dominic Carter, and many more. For more info and to buy tickets, go to ShrinersChildren'sChampions.org. That's ShrinersChildren'sChampions.org.